Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My dear executive MBA students, this is the first online lecture. Actually, we'll continue on what we have started in the first lecture. To refresh your memory, and the first lecture was an introduction to the course. We talked about the difference between research methods and the research methodology, and also differentiated between research methodology and epistemology. On the other hand, we went through the definition of the basic concepts we said that we are using the language of variables and the relationships, and there are many concepts specific to the doing research, reading research, and we went through the basic key terminologies we may use during the course and in doing research in general. Also, we differentiated between the two paradigms, positivists and naturalists, and we concluded that in the empirical research we combine the two paradigms together in what we call the research pluralism. Today, inshallah, we'll start session 2. Session 2 is divided into two parts. In the first part, diversity in research, we will see that there are different types of variables, different types of relationships, different types of research as well, and this will be covered in the first part of the lecture. Later on, we'll talk about the steps of doing research. You know, there are some sequential steps that the researcher should follow in order to complete a piece of scientific research. And later on, we'll talk about how to formulate, how to develop a research topic and a research hypothesis. Accordingly, the first issue we'll talk about today is the approaches to social research. Actually, there are two main approaches in social research. The first approach called deduction. In deductive analysis, we usually start with some expectations, some hypotheses, some expected relationship between variables, a sort of an idea in the researcher's mind. And in induction, we start with observation, we start with real data, So we may reach the same conclusion, but in different ways. Assume that I asked you a very simple question. Is there any relationship between the studying hours or the hours spent in studying and the grades in final exams? I trust some of you may say, yes, there is a relationship. Others may say, no, there is no relationship. Whatever your answer is, I may ask you, how do you know? If your answer was yes, there is a relationship between hours studying and grades, I may ask you, how do you know that? Some of you may say that it's logic, it's by sense. Those who study more get high grades. Does it make sense? Yes, it does. Those who study or spend more hours in studying, they grasp the material better, and as a result, they will be able to answer more questions correctly in the exams. As a result, their grades will go up, will be higher. Others may say, yes, there is a positive relationship between hours studying and grades, but I have another expectation, another explanation, another interpretation. I collected data or I have observation. Doesn't mean that we systematically collect the data, but we have this kind of observation. I have many friends, I have many colleagues. I know that those who study more, they usually get high grades. I went through this experience by myself. The subjects in which I studied more, I got high grades. In the subjects I studied less, I got low grades. So these are two different expectations for the same relationship. And induction will start with the logical idea. Then later on, when we collect the data to test this idea, we may confirm or disconfirm the idea itself. And induction will start with observation, and we make some, statistical analysis. We try to find whether there is a pattern in the relationship or not, and then we may reach a tentative conclusion. So the end result of the two methods is, yes, there is a relationship between the studying hours and the grades, but the relationship is not totally linear. It is a curvilinear relationship. It means when we do research, we may need both of them. In modern research and today's research, we do not use deduction alone or induction alone. We use both of them. And this is what we call the wheel of science. In the wheel of science, we start in deductive analysis. We start with, a theory, an idea, a model, and expectations. And based on the theory, the model, expectations, we develop what we call research hypothesis. The hypothesis is an expected relationship between two variables or more. Then, in order to test this hypothesis, we collect data, observation, and the data or observation should be statistically analyzed. The analysis of the data may confirm that the theory is correct, may lead to the acceptance of the theory, of the idea, or the rejection of the idea. If we rejected an idea, another idea should be developed, and the new idea should be tested as well. We may develop new hypotheses from the new idea, then collect the data, observation, statistically analyze the data, and then we may accept or reject the new idea or the new theory. This is why look at the direction of the arrows. In the same direction, it looks like a circle. It is a circle, and this is why you call it the wheel of science. It will never stop. Once we have a theory, once we have an idea, we test the theory, collect the data, statistically analyze, and we may accept the theory. Later on, the same theory can be rejected because of, new data may come to exist, a new statistical technique may come to exist. So this is why the wheel of science is still going and going and going, and it will never stop. The main point here is scientific inquiry in practice typically involves both the deduction and induction. Both deduction and induction are legitimate, acceptable, and valuable approaches to doing research, to understanding. The point is, and this is what we made it clear, deduction begins with an expected pattern that is tested against observation. We usually collect observation to test the expected relationship. On the other hand, induction begins with data observation, and we may use the statistical analysis in order to find a pattern within the observation or within the data. Bottom line, both logic, deduction, and data observation are essential in social research. In practice, both deduction and induction are roots to the construction of social research. Now we'll talk about a new issue, which is the types of variables. In the first lecture, we talked about the main two variables, the independent and dependent variable, the cause and effect. In reality, so there is no linear relationship between the independent and the dependent variable. There are many different types of variables. In addition to the dependent and independent variables, there are two groups of variables may be used to examine the existence or absence of the relationship between the two variables. Here we have a group of variables, a group of new variables. We use them in order to examine the existence of a certain relationship. Because we use these variables to examine the existence or absence of the relationship, we call them test factors. So we have some test factors, a group of test factors can be used in order to make sure that the relationship between two variables really exists. It is not a false relationship. And another groups of variables in order to test that the absence of the relationship is true. I will make this more clear. So we have two groups. The first group contains the variables or test factors, as I said, used to examine whether the observed relationship between the two independent variables and the independent and the dependent variables is true. So the first groups of variables, we use them in order to make sure that the observed relationship is true, not false. Okay? And the other group, well, it will be another story. So let us first focus on these kind of variables, the test factors that can be used to examine whether the observed relationship is true or false. Let us start with the first test factor, which is the intervening variable. It is a test factor that occurs in time between the occurrence of the independent variable and the occurrence of the dependent variable. We know that the independent variable comes first in time order, and the dependent variable comes next. The intervening variable, sometimes you call it mediating variable, comes in between the independent and the dependent variable. Assume, for example, you observe the relationship between the number of hours people working, the number of working hours, and the consumption level, how much money people spend, And you may see that, you may observe that those who work more, they spend more money. This is very direct observation. In order to make sure that this relationship is true, there is a direct relationship between the number of working hours and the amount of money people spend. Okay, you may use a test factor called the intervening variable, or sometimes we call it mediating variable. You may find that yes, there is a relationship, but with one condition. This relationship is due to people get paid per hour. So the more hours, the more the number of hours people work, the more the income they will earn. And this income causes people to spend more. So the relationship between the number of working hours and the consumption level is not pure, is not direct. It depends on another factor, which is income. In order for this relationship to be true, we have three conditions. First, there is a direct relationship between the number of working hours and the income, and there is a relationship between income and the consumption level. And when we control over the intervening variable, the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable vanishes. It means there is no direct relationship. So the observed relationship is false. It is not true. It depends on, income. If income is related to the number of working hours, yes, the relationship will exist. But if income is not depend on the number of working hours, people get paid, per month, like salary, month salary, and if people get paid in salary, and it has nothing to do with the number of working hours, then the relationship will disappear. Like, for example, here in Egypt, we do not get paid on hourly basis. We get paid on monthly salary base. So in this case, you may not find any relationship between the number of working hours and the consumption, because we relaxed the assumption that people get paid on hourly base. So this is called intervening or mediating variable. Okay, the next variable called the antecedent variable. Sometimes we call it preceding variable. We mentioned that the independent variable comes first, dependent variable comes next. Here the antecedent variable comes even before the independent variable. It is a test factor that occurs earlier than either the independent variable or the dependent variable. Look at this relationship. We may take the same example here. Here is the relation. This is the observed relationship, the relationship between the number of working hours and the consumption level. You know, here the antecedent variable here in this case will be the working hours. We may find a relationship between income and consumption. Income and consumption. So income as the independent variable, consumption as the dependent variable. We may find this relationship, right? But this relationship is due to the number of working hours. You know, so people work a number of hours, then they get paid income, and the income makes people to spend money. So here, as you see here, the antecedent or the working hours here play the role of the independent variable. Income now plays the role of the mediating variable when we talk the language of the mediating variable, and still consumption as, you know, the dependent variable. It means this relationship is true as long as people get paid on hourly base. Then we'll find a relationship between income and the consumption. The third relationship here called the extraneous variable. The extraneous variable is a test factor that affects both the independent variable and the dependent variable at the same time. It is also called the moderating variable. Moderating variable. This is just an example here. One might think that the level of education, as it impacts the skills, might have an impact on people's attitude as well. So the education level as an extraneous variable, it improves the people's skills and also it improves the people's attitude. This is why this is why sometimes you see a relationship between skills and attitude. Those who have, high levels of skills have better attitude, have a positive attitude. But actually there is no direct relationship between skills and attitudes. The relationship is due to the moderating variable here, which is the educational level. Look at, the place, the position of the extraneous or moderating variable. It exists outside the relationship between independent and dependent variable. It is not in the way of in the path of the relationship. The extraneous variable affects the independent variable and the dependent variable at the same time. This is why you may observe a relationship between these two variables. I'll give you another example here. In summertime, the number of people dying, sinking in the Mediterranean Sea in Alexandria, may be correlated with the consumption of ice cream. In summertime, the consumption of ice cream, goes up, and also the number of people sinking in the Mediterranean Sea also goes up. Is there any direct relationship between people dying in the Mediterranean and the consumption of ice cream? Do you think when people die more, people eat more ice cream, or eating ice cream causes people to die in the Mediterranean? There is no direct relationship. The relationship here is due to one condition: the increase in the temperature In summertime, the weather temperature goes up, and this makes people to go to the beach, get into the sea, and as to swim, and also it leads the people to consume more ice cream. So we find a relationship, but this relationship is false. There is no direct relationship between the consumption of ice cream and the number of deaths in the Mediterranean. These are due to summertime temperatures. In winter, the two phenomena will disappear, right? So in this case, the extraneous variable makes us observe that there is a relationship, but the relationship in reality it doesn't exist. The fourth variable in this group called the component variable. Component variable is a test factor that is a part of the independent variable and directly affects the dependent variable. Look at these two circles, green circles, with the independent variable and the dependent variable. So the independent variable has different components. One of them is the component variable, the red circle here. We may observe that there is a relationship between the independent and the dependent variable, but in reality, not the entire independent variable affects the dependent variable. It is only a part of it. Like, for example, here, income is a component of the individual social status. The independent variable here is the social status, and there is a relationship between social status and individual consumption behavior. Actually, the entire social status does not affect the dependent variable, the consumption behavior. It is a part of it which is income. In this case, in the case of complex variables like the social status, how do you measure social status? In order to determine any individual's social status, we need first the level of education, the income, the neighborhood with the person or the individual born, the neighborhood where the individual lives, and maybe the educational levels of the parents. 5 different components to measure the social status. But which one has a direct relationship with the consumption behavior? Does it, for example, the neighborhood where the person or the individual born? No, it doesn't have any relationship. The most important factor that determines the consumption behavior is income. So income here is the component variable that leads you to the occurrence of the dependent variable. Another example, for example, take the IQ, intelligence, how to measure an individual intelligence. Intelligence also is a very complex variable. There are many theories that try to explain intelligence. Some of the theories, very old theories, say that we have 5 dimensions of intelligence. Another theory came up with 7 dimensions. And recently we have a theory that said that intelligence has 126 components, dimensions. Which one of these dimensions is responsible of the student academic performance? In order to do well in exam, you need the ability to understand, the ability to analyze, and to memorize as well, But the other intellectual skills may not be needed to succeed in exams. They may be needed to succeed in life in general. So this is why we may say that memorizing, understanding, analyzing, criticizing, these are the skills that control or affects the dependent variable, which in our case here is the academic performance. So this is called component variable. This is why in statistics, in order to figure out the effect of each component of the independent variable on the dependent variable, we use a statistical technique called the factor analysis. We analyze the independent variable to its components, and we measure, the effect of each component on the dependent variable in order to single out, the component that is responsible of the changes in the dependent variable. So far we talked about the first group. The second group of test factors, called the test factors that can help us to examine whether the absence of the relationship between two variables is true. So the first group, enables us to examine whether the existence of an observed relationship is true or not. Here, this second group, contains the variables used to examine whether the absence of the relationship between two variables is true. Sometimes we may believe that there is no relationship between two variables. Is it true or not true? Here we have two test factors. The first called the suppressor variable, the second called the distorter variable. What the difference? Now let us talk about the second group of test factors. The test factors that examine the absence of the relationship to make sure that the absence of the relationship is true, not false. Here we have, the first test factor is the suppressor variable. It is a test factor that conceals the relationship between two other variables. For example, monopoly may make the expected relationship between price and the quantity disappear. You know, in natural cases, in full competition, there is a negative relationship between price and the quantity. But sometimes in a certain market, in a certain society, and for a certain product, we may find that this expected relationship doesn't exist. Prices go up, and also quantity goes up as well. you know this is, or quantity still the same. So the expected negative relationship doesn't exist. Why is that? It is because of the existence of a third variable, which is monopoly. So the monopoly makes the expected negative relationship between price and the quantity disappear. So this is called the suppressor variable. Another It is a reciprocal relationship. You cannot tell which one affects the other. Like, for example, the relationship between profitability and investment. You know, profitability may make the organization to invest, because they keep a part of the profit to be invested in the next year, and investing money make or the organization makes more profit. It is also a reciprocal relationship. Like, which one comes first, the egg or the chicken? So the relationship between the egg and the chicken also reciprocal. Eggs leads you to, or the egg leads you to the existence of a chicken, and the existence of a chicken leads you to the existence of eggs. This is also a reciprocal relationship. The third relationship here is the asymmetrical relationship. The asymmetrical relationship. It exists when the changes in one variable, here it is called the independent variable, is responsible for the changes in another variable, which is the dependent variable. Here we have very clear independent and dependent variable. We have a causal relationship. One of the variables, the independent one, causes the other, the dependent one. So the identification, the problem is in here. The identification of the independent variable and the dependent variable is often obvious, but sometimes the choice is not clear. Sometimes we find a relationship between two variables, but we do not know which one is the dependent and which one is the independent. Here we have two different methods. The first method is to see the degree to which they may be changed, the degree of changeability of each one. The second is the time order between the two variables. Let us start with the easier one, the time order. We said this many times. The independent variable comes first. If we find a relationship between, for example, attending lecture and grades, so which one causes the other? It makes sense. Which one comes first? Attending lecture. So attending lecture is the independent variable. Grades is the dependent variable, right? Another variable here is the degree of changeability, the degree of stability in the variable itself. For example, if we find a relationship between the skin color and the crime rate in a certain city, we found that there is a relationship between the skin color and the crime rate in the city. Which one is the dependent variable and which one is the independent variable? Skin color and crime rate. Which one is more changeable? The skin color or the crime rate? For sure, the skin color is fixed. It is a stable variable. People cannot change their skin color, but the rate of crime, this may be changeable. So it doesn't make sense that when people kill more, their faces will be more black. No, this is not the case. But the more logical explanation is black skin colored people usually treated in the society with aggressiveness. People have negative attitude with this the skin color, and as a result the Afro-American people will be more aggressive. This is why they may commit more crimes. So the more stable variable here is the skin color. It is the independent variable. The more changeable variable here is the rate of crime or the crime rate, and this is the dependent variable. Another example, what do you think? If we find a relationship between personality trait and the behavior, which one is the independent variable and which one is a dependent variable? The personality trait is relatively stable. Behavior is changeable. It means the personality trait, or traits affect the individual behavior, but not vice versa. This is called the asymmetrical relationship.